Everyone stared as the old Ford rumbled down the winding dirt road, the kind of road that hadn't seen a stranger in decades. Dust clung to the tires like memories, heavy and unshakable. I hadn't been back here since I was a kid, not really. Grandpa's ranch had always been this larger-than-life place in my imagination. Wide open skis, endless fields, the kind of place where secrets hid behind every fence post. But now it was mine, just like that. A phone call and a lawyer's stamp later, and suddenly I wasn't just visiting, I was the owner. My heart pounded, a mixture of disbelief and fear. Owning this ranch wasn't just property, it was a legacy. And legacy, I knew, came with strings. The gates creaked open as if protesting my presence. I gripped the steering wheel a little, feeling the weight of every memory, every story Grandpa had told me about this place. "One day," he'd said, "you'll understand why this land matters more than gold." I never understood back then, not until now. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching over gravel, and took it all in. The main house stood proudly, though time had etched lines into its wood like wrinkles on an old man's face. The barn leaned slightly to the left, a stubborn testament to decades of wind and rain. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney as if the house itself was breathing. I should have felt peace. Instead, my chest tightened. Something in the air felt off. That's when I saw her. HOA. She looked like she had just stepped out of a storm, hair perfect, heels impossible on gravel, eyes sharp enough to cut steel. She held a clipboard like a weapon, scanning the property as if she were a general assessing a battlefield. "Excuse me," she said, her voice slicing through the quiet. "This is a residential area, you can't just—" I opened my mouth, but words failed me. I wasn't just anyone here, I was the owner. I wanted to tell her, but the words seemed too small for the moment, too fragile. I wanted to shout, to demand respect, to throw open the gates and declare, "This is mine now." But something in her gaze made me pause. She didn't know, and somehow that made her dangerous. She stepped closer, clipboard held like a shield. "I need to see your permits. HOA rules are very clear." Her tone had that polite menace, like she was smiling, but every curve of her mouth was a warning. I swallowed, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. Permits, rules, boundaries. Words meant to cage me in a world I didn't belong to anymore. I remembered Grandpa's words again. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who stay silent the longest. I drew a deep breath, letting the weight of the ranch fill me. Not just the house, not just the land, but the history, the fights, the triumphs buried in every inch of soil. And then I spoke, calm but firm. "I'm the owner. I inherited this ranch." Her eyes narrowed, scanning me like I was a puzzle missing too many pieces. "Owner," she repeated. "There must be a mistake. You don't live here. You don't even—" I held up the deed, letting the paper shake slightly in my hands. "This says otherwise." Her face flickered, anger, disbelief, confusion, but it wasn't enough to break her. HOA wasn't someone who backed down easily. That much was obvious. And yet there was hesitation, a pause, something in her shifted just for a moment. I should have felt victorious, triumphant even. But instead, I felt a strange, hollow pit opening in my chest. The ranch was mine, but the fight had only just begun. And the battle wasn't just about land or rules. It was about respect, about legacy, about proving that someone like me, someone so far removed from this community, could actually belong here. I looked around, taking in the sprawling pastures, the wind rustling through tall grass, the distant outline of mountains etched against the amber sky. This land had seen joy, heartache, love, loss. It had seen Grandpa, full of stubborn pride, tending to his fields and teaching me about hard work, honor, and resilience. And now it was up to me to honor that. Karen's voice cut through my reverie. "Do you even know what you're walking into?" I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to. I wanted to tell her I had no idea, that I wasn't ready, that maybe I wasn't strong enough. But Grandpa's voice lingered in my mind, steady and unwavering. "Dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice." I met her gaze and nodded. "I'm ready to learn." She studied me a moment longer, then scribbled something on her clipboard, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. I couldn't tell if it was respect or calculation. Either way, I knew one thing. The storm had arrived, and I was standing right in the middle of it. Why does a stranger's stare make you feel like your whole life is under a microscope? Karen's eyes followed me across the porch, sharp and calculating, and suddenly the quiet of the ranch felt heavier. Even the wind seemed to hush itself, as if waiting for the confrontation to unfold. I wanted to run, to hide behind the comfort of memories, but my feet stayed rooted in the gravel. This was my ranch now, my legacy. And I wasn't about to let a clipboard-wielding authority figure make me forget that. She spoke again, clipboard tapping rhythmically against her palm, each tap echoing like a heartbeat in the tense silence. You realize there are violations already. Trees too close to the fence, the barn roof hasn't been inspected in years, and let's not even start on the water lines. Her voice was smooth, almost rehearsed, but each word landed like a hammer strike. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the panic at bay. These were problems I had inherited, problems Grandpa had juggled for decades. And now, suddenly, they were mine. I thought I had prepared myself for the weight of responsibility, but this felt like drowning in it instead. My hands trembled slightly as I brushed a strand of hair from my eyes. I couldn't let her see weakness. Look, I said, forcing a steady tone, I know there are issues. I just inherited this place. But I plan to fix everything properly. I'm not here to cause trouble. Her eyes narrowed, but there was something almost imperceptible. Was it doubt flickering in her expression? Karen took a step closer, clipboard lowered just slightly. This community isn't forgiving. People talk. They don't just complain, they strategize. They'll find a way to push you out if you don't play by their rules. Her words should have terrified me, and maybe they did in a small, quiet corner of my mind. But there was a spark in me too, a stubbornness that Grandpa had nurtured over years of farm chores, early mornings, and long, cold nights repairing fences that no one else cared about. I could feel it now, burning like the sun rising over the pasture. I'll handle it, I said firmly. I don't care what anyone thinks. Karen studied me again, and for a moment she seemed to reconsider. Then, with a sigh that carried a mix of exasperation and challenge, she said, Fine, but don't think this will be easy. HOAs aren't forgiving, and people like me, we notice everything. I nodded, trying to mask the quiver in my chest. I wanted to ask what people like her really meant, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I watched her walk away, the click of her heels fadding over gravel. My chest felt tight, like I'd just run a marathon without moving. I knew she'd be back. And I knew deep down this wasn't just about permits or inspections. It was about proving who belonged here and who didn't. The sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the fields. I walked toward the barn, each step crunching against the gravel, each echo stirring memories of Grandpa teaching me how to ride horses, mend fences, and respect the land. The barn smelled of hay, dust, and history, a comforting scent, but also a reminder that everything here had its price. Grandpa had fought for this place, for decades, against storms, financial struggles, and even neighbors who doubted him. And now it was my turn. I ran my hand over the worn wood of the barn door. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought quietly. Out there in the open, everyone can see. But inside, that's where the real test is. I clenched my fists, letting the words sink into my bones. He had never been one to back down, and neither would I. As twilight crept across the ranch, I realized that Karen's arrival was only the beginning. She was a storm I hadn't anticipated. But storms, Grandpa had taught me, could be weathered if you understood their rhythm. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to learn that rhythm. A sudden sound broke my thoughts, a car door slamming at the far end of the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. Karen, or someone else? The ranch, so quiet for years, now hummed with tension. I could feel the weight of the land pressing down on me, reminding me that every decision mattered, every move had consequences. I stepped toward the main house, the fading light casting my shadow long and thin across the gravel. This place wasn't just land or a house or a collection of old barns. It was history, inheritance, responsibility. And with each step, I felt the responsibility settle heavier on my shoulders, but also a strange, quiet thrill. Somehow, despite the fear, despite the tension, I knew I couldn't back down. I had to face whatever came next, even if it was the relentless scrutiny of HOA Karen, the whispered judgments of the neighbors, or the weight of Grandpa's legacy. Because one thing was certain, the ranch had chosen me. And now it was up to me to rise to the challenge, to fight quietly, and to prove that even the smallest spark of courage could ignite a fire strong enough to stand against any storm. The first morning at the ranch felt like stepping into someone else's dream and realizing it had become my nightmare. I woke to the chill of dawn seeping through the cracks in the old windows, the smell of hay and dew filling the air. Sunlight spilled across the fields like liquid gold, glinting off the tall grass and revealing every imperfection I hadn't noticed before. Fences bowed, paint peeling, paths overgrown. It was beautiful, but it was broken. I should have felt peace. Instead, anxiety wrapped itself around me like a heavy blanket. I wasn't just inheriting a property, I was inheriting every problem Grandpa had carried for decades. And somewhere deep down, I felt the sting of inadequacy. Could I really do this? Could I protect what he had built? Before I could lose myself in doubt, the crunch of tires on gravel snapped me upright. Karen, of course. She hadn't waited long. Her car stopped at the edge of the driveway and she stepped out like a general inspecting her territory, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp as ever. "You've got work to do," she said, voice deceptively calm. "And I don't mean mowing the lawn." Her gaze swept over the property, then landed on me. "If you're serious about this ranch, you'll need to understand the rules. Every corner of this community has standards, and trust me, they're not negotiable." I swallowed hard, trying to steady the tremor in my chest. The ranch was mine now, yes, but it was clear it wasn't mine in the way I thought. In these fields, in this neighborhood, ownership came with invisible chains. Chains I hadn't expected and maybe wasn't ready for. Karen's sharp eyes softened for a fraction of a second. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. A flicker of understanding, of recognition, maybe even a trace of respect. And then it vanished, replaced with the familiar mask of authority. She held out the clipboard. "We'll start with the violations list. I expect you to comply." I nodded, forcing a calm I didn't feel. My fingers brushed the rough wood of the porch railing, grounding myself. This was my fight, not hers. I would learn the rules, endure the scrutiny, and eventually prove that I belonged here. The day stretched endlessly. I wandered through the fields, walked past the old orchard, checked the water lines, inspected the barn roof. Every step was a reminder of the responsibility now resting on my shoulders. Grandpa had kept this ranch alive for decades, fighting storms, debt, and neighbors who doubted him. And I was just beginning. By late afternoon, Karen returned. I felt the tension tighten in my chest like a coil about to snap. She didn't speak at first, just watched. Her silence was heavier than words. Then, slowly, she began to talk, not about violations, not about rules, but about the land itself. "You know," she said quietly, almost to herself, "there's something about this ranch. People respect it, or maybe they fear it. Either way, it commands attention." I froze. Did she just fear? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, eyes steady. "Some things are bigger than the rules, bigger than any HOA. This land, it has a history. You'll feel it. And when you do, you'll understand why it matters so much." A shiver ran down my spine. Could she know? Could she sense the legacy buried here, the echoes of Grandpa's life embedded in every fence post, every blade of grass? The idea seemed absurd, but somehow the truth in her words resonated. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pastures, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just fighting the HOA. I was stepping into a story far larger than myself, a story of pride, loss, and power. And Karen, whether she knew it or not, was part of it. I wandered toward the barn as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges. The wood creaked under my touch, the hay smelled sweet and familiar, and yet the weight of unseen eyes lingered. I felt watched, not just by neighbors or Karen, but by the past itself. Grandpa's presence seemed almost tangible, reminding me that this ranch wasn't just land. It was a testament to resilience, stubbornness, and a quiet, unyielding strength. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave the rules, the scrutiny, the fear behind, but I couldn't, not anymore. The ranch had chosen me, and somehow I had to rise to the occasion. I clenched my fists, feeling the ache of exhaustion mixed with determination. I had no idea what lay ahead, no idea how deep the battles would go. And yet beneath the fear, beneath the weight of expectations, a spark ignited. A quiet certainty that I could endure, that I could face the storms, both literal and metaphorical, and emerge stronger. because this wasn't just about owning land. It was about proving that even someone overlooked, underestimated, and unprepared could stand tall in the face of impossible odds. Karen's voice broke the silence again, soft but unwavering. Don't make the mistake of underestimating what this place can teach you. I nodded. I didn't need to speak. I understood. This was more than a fight against HOA rules. This was a journey into the heart of a legacy and into my own capacity to rise above fear, doubt, and expectation. As darkness fell and the stars began to pierce the sky, I knew the coming days would be the hardest of my life. But for the first time, I felt ready. Ready to face Karen, the community, and the challenges hidden in every corner of the ranch. Ready to uncover the truth about what it meant to belong. And maybe, just maybe, ready to discover the secrets this land had been waiting to reveal. The first knock on the door felt like a warning, sharp, deliberate. It echoed through the quiet house, bouncing off the walls like a drumbeat I couldn't ignore. I froze, heart hammering, convinced it was Karen, or worse, one of the neighbors testing my resolve before the HOA had even officially arrived. But when I opened the door, there was no uniformed official, no clipboard-wielding storm cloud. Just a package, small, unassuming, resting on the porch like it belonged there all along. Curiosity clawed at me. I picked it up, feeling the weight of mystery in my hands. No return address. No markings except my name scrawled in neat, deliberate handwriting. I carried it inside, the wood floor creaking under every step, my pulse racing with both anticipation and unease. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it, half expecting it to explode, half hoping it would whisper secrets about the ranch Grandpa had never shared. Finally, I tore it open. Inside was an old journal, leather-bound, worn at the edges as though it had been handled countless times. My grandfather's handwriting sprawled across the pages, small, meticulous letters that suddenly felt like a lifeline. The first entry was dated decades ago, and already a chill ran through me. This wasn't just a diary. This was a roadmap, a history, a warning. He wrote about storms, both literal and metaphorical. About neighbors who had tried to take pieces of his land, about the struggles to maintain the ranch when money was tight, about the sense of isolation that sometimes made him feel forgotten. And then, beneath it all, there was a thread I hadn't expected: secrets. Hints of hidden deeds, buried agreements, and protections he had put in place that no one else would understand. I felt a thrill and a pang of fear as I realized that Grandpa had planned for moments like this, moments when the ranch would be under threat, and when I would need guidance. The knock came again, louder this time. I froze, the journal clutched to my chest. Karen, of course, she didn't need an invitation, she never did. I opened the door and there she stood, clipboard in hand, but this time her expression was different, less sharp, more deliberate, calculating. "You've been busy," she said, nodding toward the open journal. "I see you found some of the old records." I swallowed. Yes, I didn't know Grandpa kept so much detail about this place, about the people. She took a step closer. "It's important you understand the full story before you make decisions. This community doesn't forgive ignorance." There was a pause, then her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "And neither does the land." I felt a shiver. Could she see what I was beginning to see? The deeper power of the ranch, the history, the legacy, the unspoken influence it held over everyone who touched it. Perhaps she did, and perhaps she feared it. Karen held out her clipboard again, but this time I noticed something subtle: hesitation, a flicker of doubt. For the first time, she seemed aware that I wasn't just an inexperienced newcomer. I wasn't just someone to monitor, control, or challenge. There was more here, and she sensed it, even if she didn't yet understand the full truth. I closed the journal and met her gaze. "I'm not here to ignore the rules," I said, voice steady despite the turmoil roiling inside. "I want to understand them, and I want to protect this place, just like Grandpa did." Her eyes lingered on me for a long moment, searching for weakness. Maybe she expected it, maybe she hoped for it, but all she found was resolve. Slowly, she nodded almost imperceptibly before turning and walking toward her car. "I'll be back," she said over her shoulder, "and so will the others." The words settled over me like a storm cloud. Others, neighbors, officials, people who had once seemed distant, irrelevant. Now they were all part of the same battle, circling, waiting to see if I would falter. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of responsibility press down harder than ever. The ranch wasn't just a piece of land. It wasn't just a home. It was a fortress of history, of memories, of power, and I was its unlikely guardian. Night fell, thick and heavy, wrapping the house in shadows. I lit a single lamp and turned the pages of Grandpa's journal again, reading late into the night. Each entry revealed more than just history. Each page hinted at strategies, protections, and alliances carefully crafted long before I arrived. The more I read, the more I understood that Grandpa hadn't just left me a ranch. He had left me a legacy, and a challenge that stretched far beyond fences or HOA rules. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet truth began to crystallize. This land was more than property, it was power, and in the wrong hands it could be exploited. In the right hands, it could change everything. I closed the journal, letting the weight of that realization sink in. I was no longer just an inheritor. I was a protector. And the storm, Karen, the neighbors, the scrutiny, was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke to a sense of inevitability. The ranch didn't feel like it belonged to me yet. It felt like it was testing me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the tall grass outside the window carried a weight that made me feel both vulnerable and determined. I knew Karen would return, and this time she wouldn't come alone. The neighborhood, the HOA, they were a storm gathering on the horizon, and I was standing in the center of it. By mid-morning, my intuition proved right. A car pulled up, slow and deliberate, and a small crowd followed behind Karen, each one with a clipboard, a frown, or a sharp eye trained on the property. Neighbors who had once waved politely from their porches now stared with suspicion. The air was thick with judgment, whispers traveling faster than the wind. Karen stepped forward, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning me as if she were measuring my worth. "You see," she said, gesturing toward the gathered crowd. "This is what happens when people don't follow the rules. They notice, they scrutinize, and they enforce consequences." I felt the weight of every gaze pressing down on me. The whispers, the judgments, the expectation that I might fail. It was suffocating, but something deep inside me shifted. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who stay silent the longest. I drew a slow breath, letting it anchor me. "I understand," I said, voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly. "I'm learning, and I will comply where necessary, but this ranch, it's more than just rules on paper, it's a legacy, and I intend to honor it." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of doubt and curiosity. Karen's eyes narrowed, studying me as if she were trying to detect a crack in my resolve. And for a moment, I wondered if she would push harder, if she would demand a confrontation that I wasn't ready for. But instead, she paused, then scribbled something on her clipboard. "Fine," she said, though her tone carried no warmth. "But don't think you're off the hook. I'll be watching, and so will everyone else." The crowd dispersed, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the driveway. The weight of isolation settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had faced scrutiny before, school, work, even family expectations, but nothing like this. This was a test not of skill or knowledge, but of endurance, patience, and resilience. I walked across the yard, each step stirring dust and memories, and thought about Grandpa. He had faced storms like this, neighbors who doubted him, rules he sometimes had to bend but never break. And he had done it with quiet strength, with an unwavering sense of purpose. Could I find that same strength in myself? Could I rise to the occasion, even when the odds felt stacked against me? The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill, and I noticed something I hadn't before, the way the land seemed to pulse with life. The fields stretched endlessly, the wind moving through the grass in waves, almost as if it carried a message. I realized with a thrill and a shiver that this ranch was alive in ways I hadn't understood. It demanded respect, attention, and care, and maybe that was why it had chosen me. Hours passed. I repaired a section of fence that had leaned dangerously, checked water lines, and walked the boundaries of the property. Every task felt monumental, every detail significant. I wasn't just maintaining land. I was stepping into Grandpa's shoes, becoming the guardian of something far bigger than myself. By late afternoon, Karen returned, but this time she came alone. The storm that had gathered around me earlier seemed to have paused, waiting for the next move. She didn't speak immediately. She watched me from the edge of the driveway, her eyes sharp, calculating, but there was something new there, recognition. "You're persistent," she said finally. "I'll give you that. Most people would have given up by now." I met her gaze steadily. "Persistence isn't optional," I said quietly. "Not when this land, this legacy depends on it." She studied me, and for a long moment it felt like time had stopped. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Not a concession, not a truce, but an acknowledgement. She had realized something crucial. I wasn't just a new owner. I was someone who could stand, who could endure, who could face scrutiny and emerge intact. As she walked away, leaving the property quiet once more, I felt a strange mix of triumph and dread. The storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time, I sensed that I had a chance, not just to survive the scrutiny of the HOA and neighbors, but to protect the ranch, honor Grandpa, and uncover the deeper truths hidden within this land. And somewhere, deep down, I knew that the challenges ahead were only preparing me for something far greater, something none of us could have anticipated. The next morning, the ranch didn't feel like my own yet. It felt like a battlefield. The sun had barely risen, and already I could hear the distant hum of voices. Not just Karen's this time, but others too. The community had started to mobilize, quietly at first, but unmistakably. It was as if the land itself had sent out a signal. The arrival of a new owner would not go unnoticed, and the storm would test me in every way possible. I stood on the porch, staring out across the fields, feeling the weight of every expectation pressing down. Grandpa had always said that land demanded respect, but I had never understood just how fiercely. Each tree, each fence post, each weathered barn board seemed to whisper stories of battles fought quietly, victories won in silence, and sacrifices that went unnoticed. And now those whispers were directed at me. Karen arrived mid-morning, her heels clicking against the gravel like a metronome of tension. But she wasn't alone this time. Behind her, a small group of neighbors appeared, each carrying notebooks, cameras, or clipboards. They had come to watch, to judge, to document every move I made. Their eyes followed me as I stepped outside, and I felt the full weight of their scrutiny, the invisible chains of expectation tightening around my shoulders. Karen's voice cut through the tense air. "We need to talk about compliance," she said, sharp, precise, unyielding. "You can't just inherit land and ignore the rules. There are inspections, permits, approvals." Her words were relentless, a barrage of authority designed to overwhelm. I drew a deep breath, letting the tension settle like a storm cloud in my chest. "I understand," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline thrumming through me. "And I intend to meet every requirement, but this ranch, it's more than regulations on paper. It's a legacy, a life built over decades, and I'm here to honor it." A murmur ran through the crowd. I could feel their skepticism, their doubt. But I also sensed something else, curiosity. A flicker of respect buried under the judgment that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as unprepared as they hoped. Karen's eyes narrowed, studying me like a general measuring an opponent's strength. For the first time, I noticed something subtle, hesitation. She paused, pen hovering over her clipboard, and I realized she was calculating something, trying to gauge not just my competence, but my resolve. "Fine," she said at last, her tone controlled but edged with a hint of concession. "But don't mistake patience for weakness. This community will notice every misstep, every oversight, and they won't hesitate to challenge you." I nodded, meeting her gaze steadily. I expected no less. The crowd began to disperse, but a few neighbors lingered, their eyes still sharp, still measuring. I felt the isolation settle over me, the quiet realization that I wasn't just maintaining a property. I was stepping into a legacy that demanded vigilance, endurance, and quiet strength. Later that afternoon, as I walked the perimeter of the ranch, I discovered something I hadn't noticed before, an old boundary marker, half buried in the dirt with faded inscriptions. Grandpa had mentioned it in passing, but I hadn't understood its significance until now. This wasn't just a property line. It was a historical marker, a legal anchor that tied the ranch to protections and privileges most people would overlook. My pulse quickened. The land itself held secrets, safeguards designed to preserve its legacy, even against people like Karen and her allies. As I traced the faded letters with my fingers, a new understanding settled over me. The ranch wasn't just a place to live. It was a fortress, a repository of history, and a symbol of authority. And maybe, just maybe, that was why Karen had reacted the way she did. She had sensed the weight of it even if she couldn't fully grasp it. By evening, I returned to the house, exhausted but resolute. The journal lay open on the table, the pages whispering strategies and stories of Grandpa's battles, both with nature and with neighbors. Every word felt like a blueprint, guiding me not just through maintenance, but through survival, negotiation, and endurance. Corinne knocked again, soft this time, almost tentative. I opened the door and she studied me with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. "You're more capable than I expected," she said, voice low, almost grudging. "But this isn't just about property. There are forces at play here you can't see yet. People will try to push you, and you'll have to respond." I nodded, gripping the journal like a shield. "I'm ready," I said, feeling the fire of determination ignite within me. "I won't back down, not from rules, not from scrutiny, not from anyone who doubts me." Her eyes flickered just for a moment with something I couldn't name. Respect, fear, recognition. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me alone on the porch. The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. I could feel the power of the land thrumming beneath my feet, its pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet realization settled in. The challenges ahead weren't just tests of endurance. They were preparing me for something far greater. Something no one, not even Corinne, could have predicted. The next morning felt different. The air was heavier, charged with expectation, as if the ranch itself knew the confrontation was coming. I woke before dawn, the sky a pale wash of pink and gold, and walked outside barefoot, feeling the dew-soaked grass press against my feet. Every blade seemed alive, whispering secrets, warning me that the calm before the storm was ending. I didn't have to wait long. Corinne's car appeared down the long driveway, headlights cutting through the mist like knives. But she wasn't alone. Behind her rolled a line of vehicles, official-looking and deliberate, each one carrying people with clipboards, cameras, and that unmistakable aura of scrutiny. The storm I had sensed earlier had arrived in full force. Corinne stepped out first, clipboard clutched tightly, eyes locked on me. She radiated authority, but there was something different this time, something almost hesitant, a subtle recognition that I was no ordinary homeowner. She raised a hand, signaling the others to pause, and stepped forward. "We need to address compliance immediately," she said, voice sharp and precise. "Inspections, permits, and violations must be documented and corrected. This community will not tolerate negligence." I swallowed, feeling my chest tighten. The pressure was immense, suffocating even. But the ranch beneath my feet, the legacy of Grandpa's years of toil, whispered its own encouragement. I drew in a slow, steady breath. "I understand," I said, voice firm, "and I will meet every requirement, but I will also honor this land and its history fully. That is non-negotiable." Her eyes flickered, sharp and assessing. "You speak as if you have authority here," she said, "but you're new. You don't understand the weight of this community's scrutiny." I straightened, feeling something awaken inside me, a quiet, undeniable certainty. "Authority," I said slowly, letting the word hang in the cool morning air, "doesn't come from age or tenure or approval. It comes from responsibility, knowledge, and the courage to act. I inherited this ranch for a reason, and I intend to lead it, not just maintain it." The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Corinne's lips pressed together, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Her posture remained defiant, but the sharpness of her scrutiny faltered, just enough for me to sense the shift. I stepped closer to the barn, the ground beneath me firm and steady, and held up the journal Grandpa had left me. "This ranch isn't just land," I said, voice resonating with conviction. "It's a legacy, a history, and yes, authority. Those who built it, who protected it, made decisions that ensured its survival, and now I carry that responsibility forward. That is why I am not simply a homeowner. I am the one in charge. I am the one who decides how this land and its future will be honored." The wind stirred, moving through the trees and tall grass, carrying my words as if nature itself had heard me. Corinne took a step back, her composure faltering slightly. I could see the calculations in her eyes, the recognition that my claim went far beyond a simple inheritance. A hush fell over the crowd. The realization seemed to spread among them, subtle at first, then undeniable. This wasn't just about HOA rules. It wasn't just about inspections or permits. This was about legacy, authority, and the power to shape the future of the ranch in a way no one had anticipated. Karen's voice broke the silence, quieter this time. You understand the weight of this property in ways most people never do," she said. Her words carried a hint of grudging respect, but also caution. I suppose you really are in charge." The murmurs grew louder. Some neighbors shifted uneasily, uncertain how to respond. Others exchanged glances, a mixture of shock and recognition dawning on their faces. The storm had shifted. The tides were turning. I felt the legacy of Grandpa's work settle over me like a mantle. Every sacrifice he had made, every battle he had fought, every quiet victory he had achieved, all of it had led to this moment. And now I understood that my responsibility extended beyond the fences, the barns, the pastures. It reached into the hearts and minds of those who watched, those who doubted, and those who would soon follow my lead. Karen's final glance at me lingered, sharp but now tinged with something deeper. Acknowledgement, perhaps even awe. She turned and walked back toward her car, clipboard still in hand, but the defiance had shifted into something else, an understanding that the rules, the scrutiny, and the power of the community had met their match. Alone on the porch, I felt the weight of authority settle fully onto my shoulders. The storm hadn't ended, it had transformed. What had begun as opposition, judgment, and challenge had become recognition. And I understood, finally, that the ranch, and everything it represented, was mine to lead, protect, and honor. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky with streaks of fire and shadow, I realized something profound. This was more than ownership. This was destiny. And with that understanding came the quiet knowledge that the battles ahead would demand courage, wisdom, and an unwavering heart. But I was ready. Because this was my legacy, and I was in charge. The following morning, the ranch seemed different. The air was sharper, cleaner, charged with the kind of quiet that comes before revelation. I stood on the porch, looking out at the fields stretching endlessly, feeling the weight of every tree, every fence post, every shadow cast by the rising sun. The storms of scrutiny, doubt, and judgment had not vanished. They had evolved. But for the first time, I felt steady, unshakable. Then I heard the familiar click of heels on gravel. Karen. She approached alone this time, clipboard in hand, her posture cautious, her eyes searching mine for signs of weakness. But there were none to find. "I've come to finalize inspections," she said, voice measured. But the words carried a tension, a flicker of something she couldn't hide, uncertainty. I stepped forward, holding the deed in one hand, the journal in the other. The land behind me stretched like a living canvas, every corner speaking of history, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. "Before we proceed," I said calmly, "there's something you need to know, not just as the HOA representative, but as someone who has been observing this property, and me, closely." Karen's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. This ranch has always been more than land. It's a legacy, a responsibility, a symbol of authority, and I am not just the owner. I paused, letting the words sink in. I'm the governor, and this property, it falls under my jurisdiction in ways you hadn't realized. Her eyes widened, the clipboard trembling slightly in her hands. The murmurs I had expected from neighbors didn't come. There was only silence, broken by the wind rustling through the grass. Karen stared at me as if the very ground beneath our feet had shifted. "The governor?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said, letting my gaze sweep across the property, across the history etched into every board and post, across the invisible threads of influence that tied this land to countless lives. And as governor, I've inherited not just responsibilities in the office, but responsibilities here, where my family's legacy and the law intersect. This ranch is under my stewardship, and that means every decision about it, every rule, every inspection, every objection, will be guided by my authority. Karen's lips pressed together, her expression a mixture of disbelief, awe, and slowly, carefully, she lowered the clipboard. The fire in her eyes, so long sharpened with challenge, softened into something I hadn't expected, respect. "I didn't realize," she admitted almost quietly. "I assumed," her words trailed off, the certainty she carried so confidently in the past now replaced by an acknowledgement of truth. I nodded. "Assumptions are easy. Understanding takes time and attention. You've watched this ranch, measured it, tried to judge it. But sometimes authority isn't about observation. It's about stewardship, courage, and honoring a legacy bigger than yourself. She swallowed, and for the first time I saw her hesitate. The rigid armor she had worn so flawlessly began to crumble, revealing a human beneath. The same human who had, moments ago, tried to protect the rules she believed in, but who now confronted the reality of a power far greater than hers. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of hay and earth, rustling the journal in my hands. I opened it to a page Grandpa had marked decades ago, a note in his meticulous handwriting. Respect is earned, not given. Authority is felt, not demanded. I smiled faintly, realizing that the old man had prepared me for this moment in ways I had only just understood. Karen finally exhaled a long, measured release and nodded. I see now, the rules, they aren't the full story here. They never were. I stepped aside, letting her and the observers pass across the property. The crowd had gathered silently at the edges now, watching, whispering, reassessing. They weren't just witnessing a confrontation. They were witnessing acknowledgement. They were seeing what it meant to inherit more than land, more than a title, more than a legacy. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the ranch in golden light. Every shadow receded, every worry softened, and the field seemed to hum with life. I felt Grandpa's presence in the wind, in the soil, in the creaking boards of the barn. He had built this place not just for himself, but for moments like this, moments when courage, authority, and quiet strength converged. Karen approached me one last time, extending a hand, not in confrontation but in recognition. You've proven yourself, she said, voice steady. This is your land, your legacy, and now I understand why. I shook her hand, feeling the tension dissolve. The storm had passed, transformed into acknowledgement, respect, and understanding. The ranch was mine, not just by inheritance, but by authority, courage, and the weight of a legacy carried forward. As I watched the crowd disperse, the mountains in the distance bathed in sunlight, I felt an overwhelming sense of completion and purpose. This wasn't just the end of a conflict. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where the land, the legacy, and the responsibilities entrusted to me could thrive. And for the first time, fully, completely, I understood I wasn't just inheriting a ranch. I was inheriting a destiny. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.